He was full of life, adventurous, definitely. We got quite the number of phone calls from daycare. Cooper was climbing on the table and fell over and bumped his head.
Go Cooper, go Cooper.
He was just happy all the time.
If you're happy and you know it, shout hooray. Hooray!
Welcome back. I'm Cassie and this is A Wicked World. The story I have for you today is about a little boy who was slowly tortured out in the hot sun one day. And while many people believe this father made his son suffer intentionally, there are some people out there who think it was just a careless mistake. Let me know what you think at the end of the video. This is the story of Cooper Harris. Cooper Mills Harris was born on August 2nd, 2012 to Justin Ross Harris and Leanna Harris in Marietta, Georgia. He was said to be very happy, social, and a calm baby. Cooper liked talking to everyone he met. He also loved trucks and cars and often waved and told them bye-bye as they passed by him. Cooper's parents, Justin, who goes by his middle name Ross, and Leanna, had gotten married in May of 2006, and Cooper was their only child. On the morning of June 18, 2014, Cooper's father, Ross, was bringing him to daycare. Cooper went to daycare only about a mile away from where Ross worked, so he was usually the one to bring him in the morning. Ross also sometimes picked Cooper up after work, but oftentimes this was Leanna's responsibility. So that morning, on their way into work and daycare around 8:57 a.m., they stopped for breakfast at a Chick-fil-A restaurant, which was less than a mile away from Ross's office building on Cumberland Parkway in Vinnings, Georgia. The father and son would go inside the restaurant and eat some breakfast sandwiches together. Once they were finished, they headed back out to the car, which was around 9:20 a.m. At this time, Cooper was awake and Ross carried him out of the restaurant. When Ross put Cooper back into his car seat, he buckled him in, gave him a kiss, and said, "Ready, let's go." Cooper then kissed his dad back. From there, Ross drove directly to the Home Depot treehouse office where he worked, instead of driving and dropping off Cooper at his daycare at Little Apron Academy. When Ross left the Chick-fil-A, he should have turned at the intersection of Paces Ferry Road and Cumberland Parkway in order to head to Cooper's daycare. But instead, he had gone straight through this intersection and proceeded to work. Ross's job at the Home Depot office was only about 0.6 miles away from the Chick-fil-A and would have only taken approximately 4 minutes to get there. Ross pulled into his office parking lot, got out of his car, grabbed his work bag along with a Chick-fil-A cup, and walked into his office at approximately 9:25 a.m. Little Cooper was still strapped in his rear-facing car seat in his dad's Hyundai Tucson. Around 12:30 p.m., Ross would go to lunch with a few coworkers at a nearby Publix. However, they would end up taking the coworker's car, so he still would not notice that he had left Cooper behind that morning. Following their lunch, Ross and the other men would make a quick stop at Home Depot, where Ross would purchase some light bulbs. Then, after his coworkers had dropped him back off in the work parking lot, Ross walked over to his car, opened the driver's side door, and put the light bulbs inside. He did not see his son in the back seat, who had at this point been sitting there for about 4 hours. At 3:16 p.m., Ross would even text his wife, Leanna, asking when she was going to pick up his buddy from daycare, referring to Cooper. So he was thinking of his son, but he did not remember that he was in the car still, even though he had his son on his mind, which I find a little odd. Then an hour after that, at 4:16 p.m., about 7 hours after Ross had left Cooper in his car, Ross returned to his SUV, got in, and drove away from the office. He headed north on Cumberland Parkway towards the nearby AMC theaters as he was planning on going to see 22 Jump Street with some of his friends. But after driving for only a few minutes, he suddenly pulled into the Acres Shopping Mall Plaza. Here, witnesses reported hearing squealing tires and seeing Ross jump out of the car and screaming, "What have I done? What have I done?" Ross was frantically trying to get Cooper out of his car seat, and an onlooker would see him struggling and come to help him out. This same onlooker would then later give Cooper CPR after Ross attempted very briefly to do it himself and then gave up. Ross also did not call 911 himself. He tried to call Cooper's daycare and then Leanna. So a few bystanders would call 911 to get help for Cooper. Meanwhile, Leanna was on her way to pick up Cooper from his daycare, not knowing what had happened. And when she learned that her son had never arrived that day, she came to an immediate conclusion. She said Ross must have left him in the car. There's no other explanation. Ross must have left him in the car. I think that's kind of weird to jump immediately to that conclusion the second you find out he hasn't come into daycare. That's even before she spoke to Ross. So he could have just taken him for like a father-son outing. She had no idea. The first thing she came up with was he must have left him in the car. The temperatures on that hot summer day had reached 92 degrees Fahrenheit or 33 degrees Celsius. And they could reach as high as 140 degrees in a closed car in a matter of hours. When police arrived on the scene, Ross seemed very distressed. However, they would say that his mood would fluctuate back and forth between frantic and calm. And while he wasn't placed under arrest at this point, he was placed in the back of the police cruiser with handcuffs on so that officers could ensure that he would not leave the crime scene. Police estimated that Cooper had died around noon, which was about 2.5 hours after Ross had left him in the car. At 10 p.m. that night, Ross was arrested and brought in for questioning. He told police that he thought he had brought his son to daycare and completely forgot that he had been in the back seat. Though detectives would think that some of his responses during this interrogation were rather odd. One officer reported hearing Ross say, "I can't believe this is happening to me. I'll be charged with a felony, and why am I being punished for this? Because you killed your son, so." Another odd thing during this interrogation was that Ross forgot to tell police that he had bought some light bulbs at Home Depot that day, and he forgot to tell them that he had placed them in his car, where Cooper was. This is the security footage from the parking lot where Ross worked, and you can see his friends dropping him off after lunch, and then Ross going over to his SUV and placing the light bulbs in the driver's side door, then walking away.
Pay attention if you can see inside the vehicle.
No.
Okay. Well, did you see kind of a blur go across the windshield there?
Looks like an arm goes in.
When Leanna Harris showed up to the police station to see her husband, she was let into the interrogation room to speak with him. While both were visibly upset at first, things would calm down and then get a little bit odd. At one point, Leanna asked Ross if he had said too much to the police. Ross also said to Leanna that he would not bring Cooper back if he could. That's right, I said would not. He said it was because he was in heaven. But what parent would ever say they would not bring their child back if they could? A guilty one, in my opinion. An autopsy the following day confirmed that Cooper had died of hyperthermia. His body showed injuries consistent with a struggle to get free from his car seat while he was dying. He had scratches on his face and abrasions on the back of his head and neck. Initially, police believed that the death of the toddler had simply been caused by absent-mindedness. But suspicions began to grow as police investigated, and they soon announced that they did not believe Cooper's death was an accident. And Ross was being charged with his son's murder. He was charged with malice murder, felony murder, cruelty to children, dissemination of harmful materials to minors, and sexual exploitation of children. Now, I'll get into those last two charges in just a minute, because those don't have to do with Cooper, but they do have to do with that day that he died. Ross Harris pled not guilty. When Ross was arrested and charged, it triggered a wave of sympathy, as well as a vigorous debate over whether or not the father should be punished. However, as new information started to come out, two organizers of Change.org petitions closed down the petitions to get Ross out of jail. Witnesses at the Acre Mill shopping plaza that Ross had pulled into when he found that Cooper was dead had varying opinions on Ross's guilt. However, many believed that he was indeed guilty. One witness, the one who had taken over CPR, noticed that Ross had been fumbling around and doing it improperly. An officer who had arrived on the scene thought that it was odd that Ross was not even near his son when she arrived there, and many people believed that Ross's emotions were merely an act. A search warrant had been obtained for the Harris' Marietta condo, and investigators had seized a number of items from the home, including an iPhone 5, a laptop computer, Ross's 2011 Hyundai Tucson, a computer tower, and other electronic devices. Investigators were looking for any evidence of child mistreatment or neglect. Upon searching these devices, investigators found that Ross had previously searched how hot it needed to be in a car for a child to die. Leanna, Cooper's mother, had also searched the same thing. When Ross was later confronted about it, he said he was only searching it because he was afraid it could happen to him. And he had also conducted internet searches into child-free lifestyles. There were also searches done on how to survive in prison. The other thing that police looked into was Ross and Leanna's marriage. They wanted to see if there was any problems between the two. And what they discovered was that Ross had sent many explicit text messages and pictures to other women as well as underage girls. He had been texting 7 different women and sending dick pics. And he had been doing some of this on the day that his son was out in the car dying. Ross had profiles on several dating sites, as well as the Kick app and Whisper. On the day that Cooper died, Ross had actually responded to 4 different Whisper posts, including one where he mentioned that he had gotten up at 5:30 to take care of his son. And when the poster had asked about Cooper, he said that he was awesome. So clearly he had him on his mind, but he still didn't realize, hey, I left him in the car a few hours ago. On the Whisper app, which encourages people to tell secrets, Ross had said that he missed having time to himself. He also wrote that he hated being married with a kid, saying that the novelty had worn off and he was left with nothing to show. In another message on the Whisper app, Ross said, "I love my son, but we all need escapes." Now this was right around the time that they were going to the Chick-fil-A restaurant the morning that Cooper died. Then detectives discovered even more. They found out that the couple had been having financial problems and that Ross had taken out not one, but 2 life insurance policies on his son. One for $25,000 and one for $2,000. And they wouldn't even need this money to pay for Cooper's funeral because Cooper's funeral would end up being covered by a grant from the Home Depot where Ross worked. During the investigation, while Ross was even being held in jail, he had written out instructions to his family on how to cash out Cooper's life insurance policies. Ross told detectives that he had about $4,000 in credit card debt, as well as student loans and loans on 2 vehicles. This only led to further suspicion. Detectives believed that Ross, who was clearly cheating on his wife, had dreamed of having a child-free life, and getting rid of Cooper was his solution. Now, Leanna Harris still believed that Ross was a wonderful father who loved Cooper with all his heart. Ross had previously told Leanna that on his drive from Chick-fil-A to his office building, he hadn't heard a single peep out of Cooper, which had led him to believe that maybe he thought Cooper was only sleeping, which is how he had forgotten about him. Leanna agreed with Ross and said that Cooper must have had a belly full of sausage biscuits and fallen asleep. It was a 4-minute drive. I know kids fall asleep easily, but it was a 4-minute drive. Then there was also the fact that Cooper's nursery school teachers said that when he had previously gone to breakfast with his dad in the morning, he had come in afterwards full of energy. Originally, Ross's attorney had fought for Ross to have a separate trial on his charges for sexting underage girls. One was 15 at the time and one was 16. However, the prosecution wanted these to be left in with the murder trial to show what Ross had been doing while Cooper was out in the hot car, dying. These charges would end up being included in the murder trial as the prosecution wanted. Ross's trial was originally set to be held in Cobb County. The judge, however, had granted the defense a motion for change of venue, and the trial was moved to Brunswick in Glynn County, as it was determined that the local media had impacted Cobb County's potential jurors. Ross Harris's trial began in January of 2016, and his attorney insisted that Cooper's death was an accident, and there was nothing in the state's evidence that could prove otherwise. The prosecution's belief, however, was that Ross had purposely murdered his son by leaving him in the hot car that day. Prosecutors contended that Ross had intentionally left Cooper in the car so that he could pursue his extramarital affairs. They believed that Ross decided he wanted a child-free life. The defense was saying that Ross had only left his son in the car as a consequence of his daily routine being altered. But the Chick-fil-A restaurant that Ross had brought Cooper to was only, like I said, 0.6 miles away from his work. And the father and son had been to this Chick-fil-A before for breakfast, prior to him dropping Cooper off at daycare. How can you forget your child in such a small period of time? In 4 minutes, about a half a mile. How? In total, the prosecution would call forth 51 witnesses, and the defense would call forth 18. The Cobb County police crime scene technician was the first witness for the state. Graphic pictures and videos were shown to the jury, which exhibited the young boy's body lying on the asphalt outside his father's silver SUV in June of 2014. In these images, Cooper's eyes were open and his legs looked to be frozen in a bent position from sitting in a car seat inside the hot locked car, the result of rigor mortis that had begun to set in. Several witnesses testified to Ross's behavior at the scene, including a few police officers. One of these officers testified that when they had arrived on the scene that day, Ross had not even been near his son. He also said that he did not observe Ross cry and he believed that he was faking his grief. The officer said that Ross would go from calm to shrieking to calm again, and this behavior didn't make sense. Then the police officer who had driven Ross to the station spoke, and she said that Ross had tried to make idle chit-chat during the ride, not something she expected of somebody who had just lost their child. The officer said that again, once at the police station, Ross tried to engage her as what she described as casual conversation. and he had commented how the handcuffs that she had used were different than the ones that he had used while working for police in Alabama. Okay, cool. Your kid just died. Who gives a shit about handcuffs? What a weird thing to talk about. Another witness described Ross's futile efforts to try to breathe life back into his son's limp body. This witness said that Ross had tried to revive his son, but after only a few compressions and breaths, he had walked away. Ross's defense claimed that his client was just too overwhelmed with grief and couldn't concentrate on giving CPR. Then the jury was told about the evidence they had of Ross sexting 6 other women as well as 2 underage girls. They spoke about how he had been messaging women for months and he had met up with prostitutes behind his wife's back. The prosecution said that on the day Cooper was dying, he was texting a 16-year-old trying to get pictures of her nether regions. Ross's attorney immediately objected to testimony about the sexting on the grounds that it was irrelevant to Cooper's death, but that was overruled. Ross's attorney described his client's sexting as gross, filthy, and graphic, but said that his client's sex life, no matter how perverse, nasty, and wrong as we think it is, it doesn't have a thing in the world to do with the fact that he forgot that little boy. Nothing. The state's evidence also included multiple pictures that Ross had sent of his penis to women on the day that Cooper had died, and they brought up the fact that he had met with some prostitutes only days before his son's death. Ross's sexual behavior had interrupted time with his son as well. He had sent pictures of his genitalia to multiple women while attending an Atlanta Braves baseball game with his son. Ross would also admit at one point to being a sex addict. Evidence also showed that Leanna had prior knowledge of her husband's infidelity. She had actually filed for divorce in February of 2016. Leanna testified in court for the defense, saying that even though Ross had ruined her life and humiliated her, he would never have intentionally killed their son. Leanna also testified that Cooper's car seat was rear-facing and was placed in the middle seat of the back row of Ross's Hyundai Tucson SUV. She claimed that Cooper's head was at least 2 inches from the top of the car seat. And she further testified that a picture of him that was taken on April 20th, sitting in his car seat, showed that the top of his head was not above the top of the car seat. Leanna said Cooper had not had a growth spurt since, though a teacher at his daycare would say the exact opposite. The defense also called forth several character witnesses for Ross, and generally they said that he was a loving father. Although the prosecution pressed the witnesses, saying that they had not known about his extramarital affairs. Prior to the trial, investigators had recreated as many of the details of the crime scene as possible. And what they discovered did not go in Ross's favor. They found that Ross could indeed have seen his son in the back seat from his position in the driver's seat. Investigators also discovered that Ross had received a group email that day from Cooper's daycare, which had failed to jog his memory still of his son. It was also said that Ross should have noticed the awful stench in the car when he had gone into it that afternoon, as the smell was said to be overwhelming. And according to testimony given by teachers at Cooper's daycare, Little Apron Academy, Ross would usually drop off his son at daycare between 8:30 and 8:45 a.m. on his way into work. He was, however, frequently late, and on the days that he was tardy, he would notify the daycare no later than 8:40 in the morning. But on the day that Cooper had died, at 8:55 in the morning, which was 15 minutes after the normal time that he would call by, Ross and his son were leaving the Chick-fil-A. Ross never called Little Apron Academy to say that they were running late or that Cooper had eaten breakfast, and that's what he had done in the past. Another odd thing that one of Cooper's teachers noticed was that in the weeks before Cooper died, his father had suddenly stopped taking pictures of his son, something that he had previously done every day. Leanna would say, though, that this was because Cooper was getting bigger and running around, so taking pictures of him was getting more challenging. But at the end of his trial on November 14th, 2016, Ross Harris was found guilty on all charges, and he was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole for 32 years. Then in January of 2017, however, Ross's legal team filed a motion for a new trial, arguing that the revelation of Ross's numerous affairs and self-admitted sex addiction had made it virtually impossible for him to have a fair trial. But this motion was denied on May 20th, 2021. Yet again, in January of 2022, the Supreme Court would hear arguments by Ross's legal team as to why he should have a new trial. Following this, on June 22nd, 2022, The court decided that evidence that had been presented during Ross's trial regarding his sexual activities had merely acted to make him look like a scumbag. Therefore, Ross's conviction of murder, as well as his count of cruelty to children, was overturned. And due to the fact that crucial motive evidence that was admitted during the first trial was no longer available to the state, the district attorney made the difficult decision to not try Ross Harris again. So he is off the hook for his crime. Ross does, however, still remain convicted of felony attempt to commit sexual exploitation on children and dissemination of harmful materials to minors. He still has about 5.5 years to serve before his release. And to this day, Cooper's mother, Leanna, still does not believe that her ex-husband, Ross, planned their son's murder and does not think that he should be in prison for the rest of his life. Little Cooper's funeral services were held on June 28, 2014 at University Church of Christ in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. A private burial followed at Tuscaloosa Memorial Park Cemetery. Well, thank you for listening to all of Cooper's story today. Cooper's dad was clearly too self-absorbed and worried about his own gross desires to properly care for his son. Had he not been engaging in all these different relationships outside his marriage, maybe he wouldn't have forgotten his son in the car that day. Whether or not he did it on purpose or not, I personally believe that he did do it intentionally. And it's unbelievable to me as well that Leanna has no doubt in her mind that Ross is innocent. So if you do like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is 2 to 3 times every week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you for being patrons of A Wicked World. Adina, Alana, Allie, Amanda, Amberly, Amy, Angela, Angie, Brandy, Brother Mike, Carrie, Catherine, Cecilia, Celia Cruz, Shantae, Claire, Danielle, Danny J, Drew, Emily, Eric, Frank, Georgia, Haley, Hannah, Hannah, Jackie, Jen, Jennifer, Jerica, Josie, Kara, Christy, Kristen, Lori, Lindsay, London, Mandy, Marion, Mary, Mel, Melissa, Mimi, MJ Kelly, Neoma, Nikki, Owen, Ray, Robin, Sharon, Starlet Sky, Stephanie O, Stephanie T, Susan, Suzanne, Tamra, Tammy B, Tammy S, The Huntsman, Tracy UK, Wesley, and Whisper216. You guys rock. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon. So check it out at patreon.com/awickedworld or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims never get forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a case you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email at awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.